Welcome to the Catholic Information Center. Thank you, everyone, for coming to our Young Professionals program, Happy Hour, monthly happy hour. If you're not on our email list and you'd like to hear about our other happy hours monthly, please make sure you sign up. The sign-up sheet was where you entered. And also want to make sure you know that the Catholic Information Center coming up in less than a month. We have our June 1st dinner. It's our first annual Catholic Information Center dinner. We'll be starting awarding annually this new John Paul II, Blessed John Paul II award for the new evangelization. So it's a great time to celebrate in the new evangelization the work of the CIC and also to have a great meal at the Capitol Hilton around the corner. So be sure to hold on to your pieces of information. We passed out as you entered a card with information about how you can register. But at the end of this lecture, we'll be raffling off a free ticket. So be sure to hold on to that card because there's a number on the back. You don't want to lose that. So it's my great pleasure this evening to introduce our speaker, Helen Alvare. And Helen Alvare is an associate professor of law at the George Mason University School of Law, where she teaches and publishes scholarship concerning family law and religion. She's also the chair of the Conscience Protection Task Force of the Witherspoon Institute in Princeton, the president of the Chiaroscuro Institute, a nonpartisan think tank concerning questions about the future of marriage and the family. And she is the consultor to the Pontifical Council for the Laity at the Vatican, a consultant to the USCCB's Pro-Life Committee, and an ABC News consultant. Previously, Helen directed the pro-life communications for the USCCB's Pro-Life Secretariat and served as an attorney in the Office of General Counsel of the USCCB and the Philadelphia law firm of Stradley Ronan. She has her law degree from Cornell University and her master's in systematic theology from the Catholic University of America. Please join me in welcoming Helen Alvare.
Thank you, Mary Rose. It's a pleasure to be here and to see so many familiar faces. And I'm actually looking forward to some back and forth with you, I hope, because what I have is a presentation, but also a question as to why we're in the situation we're in. And I'd be very interested to hear some of your reflections on that. Presently, I'm working on a book with an economist on the sex, mating, and marriage market, another book collecting essays from women on topics related to this, and then another book just on religious freedom, which doesn't take on this aspect of it. But to me, it's all become wrapped up into one, this interesting, it's sort of a car wreck of threats to religious freedom, but at the same time, very often, in the name of a view of human sexuality that there's this marvelous development economist at Harvard who's written about it very briefly, named Lant Pritchett. He calls this view sexualityism. If you Google it, you won't get far. It's not much on it out there, and I'm hoping to change. And now, sadly, my name is coming up with it, and I'm not quite ready to finish, and the book isn't ready yet. What we are seeing is very, very much, however, exemplified by the current HHS mandate. So I know you're probably familiar with that, but let me just take you through some of the high points of that, and then ask about this running together of threats to religious freedom with this view of human sexuality that is driving laws such as same-sex marriage, the contraception, sterilization, early abortifacient mandate from HHS, the taking away of federal grants on human trafficking work from the Catholic Church on the theory that without access to abortion and contraception, they are not fit to assist victims of trafficking, that we are reaching, it's been going on for a while, but we're really reaching somewhat of a zenith of the running together of these two issues. So beginning with where it really comes together in a way that you're very familiar with in the news, this current HHS mandate, right? So we knew when Senator Barbara Mikulski raised the question of a preventive health services mandate during the debate on the Affordable Care Act that something was up. and giving the Secretary of HHS the right to populate the category of preventive health care services. They had tried to get in mandatory contraception in other places in the bill. It wasn't working. We knew that this was coming down the pike and this would be a problem. And we also knew, and I wrote about this a lot, gosh, not last summer, but the summer before, that there were very inadequate conscience protections in the Affordable Care Act, quite different from what we had previously seen in federal law or what had been acceptable in state law. So we knew that this combination of a category yet to be populated, and Senator Barbara Mikulski is doing it, and this and lack of conscience protection in the law, that we were in for some difficulty. So last summer comes the so-called nonpartisan Institute of Medicine Commission, and if you look at it, I was debating someone from the Center for Reproductive Law and Policy on it. She says, "Oh, how can you say this was a biased committee? My goodness, we had medical associations there. We had, leading scientific associations, the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists and so forth." At which point I usually want to do something like, "Oh, wow, scientists, now I'm scared," right? As if these groups are not absolutely heart and soul committed to an agenda on these issues already. So Guttmacher Institute was there, and the Women's Law Center was there, and Planned Parenthood was there, and all of these very heavily politically, ideologically committed medical scientific groups were there to give the IOM their nonpartisan opinion. No religious groups were invited to testify at all. And sure enough, based on research from whom? A guy who had previously written on contraception as a public necessity, John Santelli, and the Guttmacher Institute, those are the only sources of studies cited in the Institute of Medicine report in its initial iteration on page 92. They decide that contraception is a preventive health care measure. Why? Because it prevents unintended pregnancies. They used, and I could go on way too long about this, short-term studies that took populations where out-of-wedlock pregnancies and abortion were already very, very high. After years of federal funding through, I can name so many programs of widespread contraception, introduced either more intensive promotion of it or different forms of contraception, and showed that over a short period of time, you had some favorable outcomes in their measure, either more people using contraception at first intercourse or more people using it regularly or fewer unintended pregnancies and so forth. Not at all looking at a broad array of studies, not at all looking at a longer period of time over which it can be demonstrated, and Law and Econ has done this pretty definitively, that once you introduce contraception and then abortion into a population in a large way, you cannot really avoid higher rates of unintended pregnancies, abortions, and out-of-wedlock births, all of which has correlated with the government's massive funding of and support for widespread contraceptive programs. All of which is to say there that no matter that we even leave the government's extant policies alone, the fact that there is even a competing voice to this, which interestingly enough in history has devolved almost exclusively to the Catholic Church. I mean, I'm thinking and trying to write about this. Richard John Neuhaus made a statement years ago in First Things when he said, if the philosophes of the French Revolution could wake up and find that it was the Catholics defending reason in the 20th century, they would just die. Well, sometimes I think, right, if the feminists of the 1960s and 70s would wake up, many of them are still with us, but the ones that aren't, should they wake up and discover that it was the Catholic Church defending the importance of the body-soul unity of the woman, the importance of the woman's physical health in response to particularly hormonal contraceptives, the immiseration of women in the sex mating and marriage markets as a result of their alteration by the divorcing of sex and children. They would be shocked to discover that it was the Catholic Church who was speaking about each and every one of these things. I mean, it's, I don't know exactly. I know that we did. I know how we did it. But isn't it fascinating historically and culturally that if you see, rampant amounts of fact sheets and congressional testimony on this subject, it is usually Catholic sources doing this. So what I'm saying here is what HHS and the White House are proposing here is that we shouldn't even, as Catholics, as Catholic institutions, or Catholic individuals, business owners, etc., even be able to have a critical stance. That this voice, and I will tell you, I debated the counsel from Center for Reproductive Law and Policy like 2 weeks ago at Mason, and her quote was, "Institutions like yours should have no voice. You are not acceptable in the public square. We are beyond the pale." And if you look at the legal framing of our response in the state legislatures and in the legislative history at the federal level, the language of discrimination, inequality, war on women, okay, is the language that is being used. We are, in their view, the KKK of the women's movement. That we should have no voice, okay? So that's what's going on now. The president promised accommodations, but really just passed the law as it is. There are no such accommodations for another, and you've had lots of HHS conversations here. I've seen it on the CIC website, so you don't need me to go through all the legal stuff. I'll be happy to chat about that. But I want to move into what's an interesting aspect from my perspective, that this and so many other threats to religious freedom now are coming by way of a newly strong government position on human sexuality. And that position, I think, is best captured by the phrase sexualityism. Lant Pritchett, he's a development economist. He was at the World Bank. Now he's at Harvard. He did a PowerPoint on it, and then he wrote another article. I'm not sure if he used the word sexualityism in there, but it's in there, called Copulation and Population, and in which he said very explicitly, this position on sex holds that sexual expression has nothing to do with procreation. It also has nothing to do with the unity between the man and the woman. It is unrelated to either. It is simply about one expressing oneself outwards and forming one's identity through acts that involve sexual parts of one's body. And if you look at this, you can see very much that one of the clearest places you can trace it. And I wrote an article in an international family law journal where I hinted at it, and I did a real quick job, and I promised to do a longer piece that I'm working on now. But you can trace it in the courts, really, the sort of the thin edge of the wedge that got it started. You have the Griswold opinion in 1965, which makes up a constitutional right of privacy and then puts in it married couples' right to use contraception. Well, there, they at least preserved the relationship between sex and an ongoing committed married couple, right? That was in 65. By 1972, in the birth control for singles as a constitutional right case called Eisenstadt versus Baird, the court comes out and says basically that the married couple is nothing more than a combination of two separate people with independent minds and hearts and with independent ideas, maybe even about procreation. And really what we mean by a constitutional right to access birth control is the right of individuals to make decisions about childbearing. So you still have some talk of sex in relation to being decisions about childbearing, right? You get to Roe v. Wade, it's just Eisenstadt redux, right? We have to have abortion so that people can make decisions about children. By the time, and this is a very, very famous passage in the Casey decision, by the time you get to the Casey opinion in 1992, you get what is commonly called the Ah, Sweet Mystery of Life passage, where the plurality says that the reason you need abortion is because people have a right, a liberty right, to express themselves, to build the shape of their own universe, is the expression they use, to create their identity and the shape of their universe by their sexual decisions. And they will not be able to shape their identity and their universe unless they have abortion, because they intend to express themselves sexually, but they will be repressed from doing this if a baby is attached. So at this point, now sex is completely disconnected from the other person in the room. It's about your forming your identity. And I know this is gross, and we're here in a church, but if you look at the most popular manual handed out to teenagers by the Sex Education and Information Council of U.S., SECUS, a very famous sex education group from the oldest, from, back to the 60s, they even have stuff in there. That's all this is about when you do sexual things, you are expressing your identity. So if you express your identity by masturbating alone, maybe you like to do it in front of people, or maybe in a group. If that's how you form yourself, then that's what you should do, because sexual freedom is about shaping yourself. Okay? So I know I've given TMI all over the place, but you need to understand where we've come from, where first they said, we build up the marital couple. And wasn't that the reaction to Humane Vitae, right? You're ruining marital love. Or in Benedict's, one of my most favorite lines of Pope Benedict, and that is a long list. So this is pretty amazing to get to the top, where he says that the Catholic Church is accused of blowing the whistle on sex when it is about to become divine, right? Blowing the whistle on eros by the limits that we put on it. He says this in the first section of Deus Caritas Est in response to Nietzsche's critique of us. And he says that the Church's reaction that you have to discipline this, that sex is not about just shaping yourself, but actually is about relationship and about new life. This is considered absolutely contrary to the prevailing view of human sexuality. And don't you see it in this current HHS push, right? I am fascinated as someone, I worked in the pro-life office at the Bishops' Conference beginning in 90, but I was doing the Supreme Court briefs on these issues beginning in 1987. So I've been at this for a while. And it's fascinating for me to see this trajectory, that they have no hesitation in divorcing sex from everything that ever it physically and emotionally and spiritually symbolized or actually realized. And by the way, of course, you've seen that the Casey decision in that Ah, Sweet Mystery of Life passage is the foundation of the Lawrence opinion, which made sodomy a constitutional right. Okay? And now it is the chief touchstone for all the briefs in favor of same-sex marriage, saying the state's official position, the constitutional position on human sexuality, is that it's a person's right to express themselves outward, and you have got to give them the constitutional right to do so. Marriage is just the latest way that someone wants to sexually express themselves. But even if you look at the Goodrich opinion and the Iowa opinion and Justice Von Walker's opinion in the California case, same-sex marriage is not about the two people in the marriage. It's about the individual expressing themselves sexually in a relationship or in whatever act it was. It happens to be, in this case, in a desire for a state-declared marriage with this person. But even in those opinions, marriage is not about two. Marriage is about one. If you really read them carefully, that's all there is. So to watch this evolve has been amazing, but I believe that I'm speaking the truth on this. The culmination is this HHS mandate situation. What you always saw before, what I've seen since the 80s, and people who've been working on this since the 60s could tell you more. Mike Taylor over at the National Committee for Human Life Amendment could do a great job on this, was that they always said, if you just tease the babies out of sex, then the couple will do very well together. That was one argument. The other was, if you take the babies out of sex, poor women will no longer be poor. But it was always an argument that there was some great good to be gained that pertained to poverty or the well-being of the couple or the well-being of the children. Do not let children be born again and again into out-of-wedlock situations, into poverty. They have no scruples on that anymore. If you look at the models they are putting forward in this HHS debate as the models of freedom, imagine but put the cover all over her, the model of the liberty in the French Revolution, marching with the French flag, right? Except she always is like half covered. So we'll just, for our purposes, say we have a woman who is completely covered, who is holding the flag of sexualityism. Who is that woman? She is Sandra Fluke. She is the daughter of the Planned Parenthood's New York director, who was featured in the New York Times. She is the daughter of the woman I debated from the National Women's Law Center during a Diane Rehm program. Who is this woman? She is a well-educated, pretty well-off, divorced woman with children or graduate student. I'm summarizing these three women who I've seen, who is not talking marriage, who is not talking about the well-being of her children, now the one she has or the one she hopes to have, and who is not talking about preserving a marriage or preserving even her own health. She is saying, I am seeking a regular sex life that requires contraception 24/7, 365 days a year. And I need you to pay for the most expensive and well-regarded, least failing forms of contraception. The editorial, when this first hit the fan, of the director of the New York Planned Parenthood was triumphing the needs of her divorced daughter in New York, who, if you don't pay for her to have long-acting contraception, will not be able to have as full a sex life as she needs during her new singlehood. Sandra Fluke, I don't have to go on about her testimony. I'm a single woman, and I have to have government, directed, no copay contraception at cheaper rates because what? I have a right to a commitment-free, child-free sexual experience. National Women's Law Center lawyer I was debating on Diane Rehm. Going on, I wondered how her daughter felt about this, about her daughter, a graduate student, I forget what city she was in, but she has a right to this life, this self-expression through sexual relations. And not only does she have it, but you have to subsidize it. And it's so important, this right, that no religious conscience can stand in the way. That's what, these are the standard bearers now. It's not the woman who, has had 6 children in 7 years and she's going to be poor. It's not the couple who's saying, we've had 13 children and if I have one more, I really think it's going to wreck our marriage. These were the old arguments. Those are gone in favor of a pure out right to my having the sexual path that I choose, to the point where it triumphs your religious freedom. Now, why has this bumped up against religious freedom? There are practical reasons, and there are sort of process reasons, and there's content reasons. The process reason is that it just so happens that religious institutions, in particular Catholic, but you also have like Lutheran social services and other social services, Bethany Christian, other evangelical groups. I was reading Alan Carlson's book today on Godly Seed, it's called, and it's talking about the evangelical rethinking of their embrace of contraception at a certain point in the 60s and 70s. You have a lot of these religious charitable groups who frankly pre-existed the government's getting into all of these social services, healthcare, and education. So we were already doing it, and we were doing it quite well. And again, during this debate at GMU a couple of weeks ago, the woman from NARAL asked that religious institutions would, quote, get out of the government's work. And I was like, wait, and we were here first. But they perceive it to be a field that they own. I used to think they'd be sorry if we left, but now I realize that they can't get us out fast enough. I was naive. They really don't want us, even if it means people don't get served. If it means poor areas lose the only hospital, fine, the government will move in and buy that building. I firmly believe they no longer wish us even in the field. And I think the Center for Reproductive Law and Policy said it best. You should not have a voice. I think they really mean it. So one thing is that we have these institutions. We have healthcare, we have education, we have effective, large, influential cultural institutions out there. And then the second thing that happened is an increased regulatory state. Most of law now is statutory and regulatory, right? It's the government making very specific rules for how to do things, and that's influencing our institutions, which serve the public. And then the other, of course, is a form of feminism, which celebrated this thing I call sexualityism. And I'm, for a book chapter I'm writing, I'm going back over all, the old feminist literature, including a lot of the stuff in the 80s in particular, where they thought they were sort of consolidating their victories before moving into the next phase. And really this sexualityism is really a big piece of this. So, and then the rise of the women's movement and their influence in politics. So all of these things come together, right? So, and then all the other factors in culture that drove sexual expression to the top of the heap of liberties, not the least of which I think is human nature. Pope Benedict jokes sometimes that original sin is one of the only empirically verifiable doctrines that we have. And indeed, you can see, if you wanted to think about this theologically, I think there's room for reflection that when people actually want to change the meaning of the human body, they want to change what's right and wrong, right? But they also want to change what our bodies are for, what creation means, the very origins of life. I think you could see that as a modern iteration of original sin, right? This tendency to want to change everything about sex, to say it's just gender, it's just socially constructed, I think is probably part and parcel of the human condition, and this is part of our manifestation of it at the current time. What to do about this is something I would really enjoy talking with you about, and I'm not going to go on much longer here since I don't want to run over time too much. But right now, I don't think it's enough to fight for religious freedom alone, even though I think we will win that fight, both at the constitutional level under the Free Exercise Clause, and I think we'll win it under the Religious Freedom Restoration Act. I think our arguments are great. And again, you've had presentations here on that. I'd be happy to answer any questions about that if you have them. But I really do think we can show a burden and we can show a lack of compelling state interest, which is the standard the government's going to have to meet on this. And I do think they're going to have to meet that standard even under the Free Exercise Clause, even after the 1990 Smith case that said the government gets to pass a neutral law of general applicability without religious accommodations, because it isn't a neutral law of general applicability. Millions and millions and millions of people have received exemptions to that law, but religious institutions have not. So I think on that grounds, we pierce the Smith case and we have a claim. But I think under the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, we have an excellent, excellent case. And you'll be seeing the briefs come out on that in due time. So I think it's not enough, though, for us to just win on I don't want, as a friend of mine, Notre Dame calls it the Amish treatment, right? That, you're this unique group, and we're just going to preserve this little box for you, unusual as you are. Maybe wonderful, although they're not willing to grant that to us. I think the Amish get a lot of really nice press, well deserved, but I don't think we're getting that same kind of press treatment. I think we really do have to make the substantive case that our substantive voice on these issues of human sexuality should be respected. I think if we do not, then we're not even going to get the Amish treatment for long. I think we have an opportunity. I really see this time as an opportunity. Some of you, probably a lot of you were on this letter that I wrote called Women Speak for Themselves. I'm like almost 28,000 women on this letter now who have signed on to two propositions. One, that we're owed religious freedom regarding this HHS mandate, but number two, that we're happy that the church is at least taking a critical stance on this question of contraception as the sine qua non of women's equality. That it hasn't pulled it off, has it? And it's not gonna. We're seeing higher rates of every problem contraception was supposed to correct. So I realize that, the press and many in Congress have set up the equation that if we go past the religious freedom argument here into the content of our view of human sexuality, we lose. I think we lose in the long run if we don't. That's not, we don't have to go there in our religious freedom briefs, but I think if we don't take seriously that we are being cabined and cabined and cabined on the content of our teaching in this area, then the opinion of the Center for Reproductive Law and Policy will begin to be more widely shared. Okay, so I'm going to stop there, not because I don't have more material, but because I should for time, and we could take some questions and your thoughts about this clash with religious freedom and sexuality, as I might enjoy. Thank you.
Yes. I wonder how your idea of the sort of advance of sexualityism relates to an observation I know a number of people have made, that when it comes to abortion, like we're winning, but when it comes to same-sex marriage, we're losing.
Yeah. Oh, well, first of all, I align myself with Maggie Gallagher on the latter, which I think it's the narrative is that we're losing, but I don't think we're actually losing on same-sex marriage. What do we have? 31, 32 constitutional amendment victories. Let me back up then. On abortion, I can say from watching it every day, I try not to, but I can't look away. It's just, it's such a big lie on the landscape that I cannot look away. That we really have won the argument about the humanity of the child. Even NARAL's website today, I was looking over what's their best case on HHS. And NARAL, I don't think it has the power it once had. They don't seem to be making a fierce public presence. And their president just stepped down today. She said they're not winning the young people and they need to. So their best argument against HHS, one of it is we could reduce abortion and abortion's aftermath. Interesting. So I think you can peruse Planned Parenthood and NARAL's websites top to bottom, and you will not find arguments denigrating the life of the unborn child any longer. That was open season on the unborn child in the 80s and 90s. Okay. So now they are reduced to the argument about women's freedom, and that really doesn't sound too good compared to the life of a child. And people aren't necessarily buying it. We've had decades of experience with it. So on abortion, I think we've won that piece of it. But I would say that if we're losing in abortion, we're losing what I call the demand side. And the demand side is the sex, mating, and marriage market that contraception and legal abortion fuel, that creates what NARAL calls the need for abortion, or at least people's perception in a crisis that they have to have that to turn to as the backup. So we're winning on the life of the unborn child, in my view. We are not winning in the sex, mating, and marriage market yet, although I think there's an opening right now. The amount of articles you're seeing about women and men talking about what's become of romance, courting, marriage, complementarity, it's longevity in a marriage. There's great questions being asked right now, and it is the time to dive in. On same-sex marriage, what do I think on that? I think we still have a little ways to go to make the case that backs up the true statement. Marriage is the bedrock of society. Marriage is the community on which society. One hears that and hears that and hears that, and it is always true. But why needs to be unpacked in ways that are a little bit more digestible than what I'm hearing. My favorite currently, and I was at the Aspen Institute, which is not favorable to my thinking on, same-sex marriage. It was a very, very, obviously very hostile audience. It was in the context of a debate on the Prop 8 litigation. I made the proposal, and it got a lot of pushback. And so I took that to be a good sign. People were very angry at it. That the question, what does it matter? That the people who are asking that are people with margins and privilege. These are the people who are already in the educated, the well-off, the people who all the studies show are marrying, waiting until they're married to have children, finishing college, marrying one another, staying married, remaining faithful, and yet recommending that everybody not in that category do what they please, right? The what's that expression? The defining deviancy down, or sort of, it's a noblesse oblige kind of, you have your freedom. Now, we wouldn't choose those things because they lead to disaster. But you go ahead and we will bless it and call it freedom. I think the redefinition of marriage to exclude what is, let's face it, it has many good qualities, many wonderful things that it does that I can testify to after decades of marriage. But socially, legally speaking, that it connects the mother to the father to the child is its indispensable social function. I say to my family law students, the law does not really care about your romance. I hate to break it to you. The judges in the Goodridge opinion do, but other people don't. The law only cares about the glue between the mother, the father, and the child. And if you take that out and you say that marriage is about people expressing themselves sexually and wanting the state to say, affirm me, affirm my strong feelings, affirm my sexual identity, then the people who are losing and who will continue to lose are the poor, minority races, the immigrants, who are already in a situation where nobody is really speaking out sufficiently. And we're seeing this in the new community of Hispanic immigrants in the United States. I'm first generation Hispanic. Their out of wedlock pregnancy rates, their later marriage, non-marriage are creeping up. Unless the whole society affirms that marriage is good for everyone, the wealthy are going to do it and say, well, I know they say it's sexual expression, but I also know it's good for me. It's good for the family economy. It's good for the kids. We're going to be breeding social divisions between races and socioeconomic classes that will be as deep and wide as anything you've ever seen. Very frightening, very frightening. They're already here. Kay Heimewitz's book, Marriage and Caste in America, Brad Wilcox's piece, Charles Murray's new book, they're sociologically correct. And now the problem is that try to boil that down, right? So I'm working on it. I'm really working on it. But the idea that if you take this glue apart and you'd make marriage simply about personal expression, you'll get all the bad stuff that people are doing with respect to males and females to males and parents to kids, and you won't get the good stuff. That to me is the most important argument right now. It's not about tradition. It's not about a moral evaluation of same-sex attraction or behavior. It is about what the family means and does for its members and for society. And the breakdown of that is occurring among the less privileged. And the people with more privilege are just cheering them on. Yes, over here and then back to you. Yeah.
Two quick things. With respect to Attorney General Holder, he's already under fire for other stuff anyway in the Justice Department. So to me, at this point for me, he has no credence. He's lost all credibility because of all the stuff he's gotten in. The other thing I want to say is, a few years ago, when I was in college, I did an internship with the Folklore Center of the Library of Congress, and I happened to be filing some papers away. And one of them was like a little pamphlet of like statements that had been taken from like a recent, Now March, and my goodness, I had never seen so many misogynistic / men-hating comments. Like each and every one of you men would be so insulted. I know my dad were to see it, he'd be insulted. It was just like, I could not believe how much trashing and degrading of men that I saw. I was like, my dad saw this, he dropped down on the floor. I mean, how much...
I want to point up on that one of the things that is really difficult for me about same-sex marriage too is, and you don't have to be religious to come to this conclusion, preserving the relationships between men and women. I mean, if you are religious, you really get it. If you've looked at anything related to Genesis or the theology of the body, about how innate this is, how important it is that these be preserved. And when I was asked at the Pontifical Council for the Laity, if the Pope was going to write something new about women, what would he write? And I'd say he wouldn't. He'd write something about men and women together. He wouldn't write something about women alone this time. That marvelous document Benedict wrote at the CDF on the collaboration of men and women, we'd have a document like that, because the loss of the relationship between men and women and the lack of understanding its crucial importance is also one of the difficulties with same-sex marriage. And I mean, and that too is hard to frame to people. People say, oh, well, you're excluding single people and you're excluding people with same-sex attraction, etc. But it actually is true that it is crucial for good social functioning. And now, increasingly, not just at home, but in the places where men and women are working together. Sir?
I work for World Vision, a big Christian international relief development organization. It's actually been involved over the years in a lot of religious liberty issues, hiring rights, coming at it from other angles as well, U.S. government grants, that perspective. Colleagues who have been working on these issues for a long time have this concern that when it comes to religious liberty, a lot of decisions made by the courts have effectively gutted our legal understanding of religious liberty, that we're sort of left with having to appeal to freedom of expression
and association.
And I'm wondering what your perspective is.
Without going off into legal boredom here, I think they are correct. There is a reason why in the Hosanna Tabor case, when the church argued that this was a freedom of religion matter, the Obama administration argued that no, it wasn't at all, that the freedom of association was all that was involved here. If you look at Kai Feldblum, who was at Georgetown and is now, I think, at the EEOC or in the White House, she writes that we shouldn't conceive of the legal question of exempting religions in connection with same-sex marriage as a matter of religious freedom. That it's not religious freedom, it's identity expression. But that same-sex identity always trumps religious identity. So whenever you see people trying to reduce this question to a question of freedom of association or free expression, I understand why religious liberty lawyers have done it. After 1990, it became a lot harder to win a free exercise case. And so religious liberty lawyers were looking for other places in the Constitution, like the Christian Legal Society was looking, and the Boy Scouts were looking, right? And they won their freedom of association claim, the right to associate with one another and have an opinion and to have standards for the scoutmasters they hired. They won under freedom of association because, in their case, they weren't a religious organization, but religious organizations jumped on it and said, wow, here's a place where maybe we can succeed constitutionally. Now we're in a dilemma here, right? Because we want to win these individual cases and allow religious institutions to continue operating. On the other hand, if we stop putting in briefs at the Supreme Court to the effect that the court has it wrong about the overall trajectory or the original meaning of free exercise, or the clauses together, the establishment and the free exercise clauses together, if we want to stop arguing that both of those clauses were meant to protect religious freedom versus, silence religion, which is how the Establishment Clause is being interpreted more and more, if we don't keep making those arguments, then then the scope of free exercise is going to get tinier and tinier. I understand why litigators do it. They throw everything they can into the brief and they want to win. And a free association or free speech is the ticket. They'll try it. But we have to make a robust case, an originalist case, and a common good case to the extent the Supreme Court is doing this and wanting to know, what's happening now.
So does that mean that Supreme Court decision really was about freedom of association and not...
Hosanna Tabor? No, it was an out-and-out freedom of religion case. The court said It is ridiculous. I mean, they used the language I loved, remarkable. Remarkable to think that free exercise does not include choosing your ministers who will carry out your entire religious mission. And they put it squarely in the free exercise clause. Yes.
Professor, have you ever engaged when it comes to religious freedom with leaders or maybe community of other Christian faith, for example? When I was like reading something about Bishop Desmond Tutu, who is a Nobel Prize a winner, he won like Nobel Peace Prize.
Yeah.
But yeah, he was fully in support of gay marriage as well as abortion. Mm-hmm. So I was just wondering, when it comes time to protecting religious freedom, how do they stand and how do they come to this position that they are advocating?
Yeah.
I'm speaking, of course, specific to Desmond Tutu as an example because it's prominent.
Very, 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 very prominent. When you have when the UN wants to do glitterazzi, right? They've got Desmond Tutu. They usually have Hillary Clinton. Lately, a lot of Meryl Streep. So he's way up there. When he speaks, people listen. What's happening is support is coming in from other religious institutions now. Where was I a few weeks ago? Indiana. And Bishop Rhodes was there. And he said he practically was brought to tears by the Lutherans' support in Indiana for him. They went marching for religious freedom side by side with him. We see in conferences on various, on this HHS topic and others, a testimony on Capitol Hill. There were, contrary to the claim there were no women on the first panel to talk about religious freedom in the House Oversight Committee, there were women there from Protestant churches. I don't have any doubt that the fact that this particular fight is centered on contraception is chilling a little bit of the fraternal and warmth between religions here. But there is some, and they are realizing that the church is doing very much yeoman's work on trying to preserve, a nice broad space for religious freedom here. What could I say? We'd like to have more. The Catholic community would certainly like to have more support on this. We do have a client who is a Christian college of the Becket Fund who is supporting Catholic institutions' position on this. On the letter to women that I put out, I definitely have women of other faiths, in particular Protestant faiths, but also people who declare themselves to be atheistic, humanists, etc. But the abortion debate, we were at that for a long time, right? And we're really good at it. We have to get good at this faster. Things move faster now. Arguments on the internet, people are able to be communicated with. Congress reacts very quickly to the news and then gets in the next day's news cycle. We really have to make our case right now. And, if any of you here are so inclined and so talented, I haven't seen an essay on this, but I'd sure like to see one on why other faiths should jump in.
But it seems like, for people like Bishop Tutu's traditions, what really galvanized them seems like the issue of civil rights, right? So, this is like a matter of standing for civil rights. So, who would want to argue against civil rights?
Yes. You mean the religious freedom civil right. Agreed. And
or issues like abortion,
right.
Abortion or issue of contraception and so on.
I agree with you. Let me say one thing. The way that opponents of ours on this have framed it is that they have all the civil rights and equality and non-discrimination language flowing from their documents. What they do, even when they give us a religious exemption, is to say, well, discrimination is bad. All right, you want to discriminate, so we'll let you. And rather than seeing our position as not only in content good for human beings and good for the equality of women and not a matter of discrimination, but we want it to be seen as a good thing. But they, I do think, have had the advantage of time and language on this from us. And we have to make it all up right now. And the language of civil rights, the language of women's equality, the language of the common goods. But the way it's been framed so far, you can see that, we're like, we'll allow you to discriminate. You remember in the faith-based initiatives thing, the White House, first under Bush and now under Obama, religious organizations can get state money to do the kind of social services that the state values. All right, we'll let you discriminate against people not of your own faith in hiring. No, you don't get it, right? Building up our institutions to make them as effective as they are is a matter of sharing a mission. It's not discriminating against other people. It's building up this good work. Oh, no. You're discriminating against non-co-religionists. So you can see the work that we have to do. And then again, when the question is contraception, on abortion and even same-sex marriage, I think, they're using the language of civil rights, but it's not as resonant. One other thing I will tell you, there's some wonderful work out there. There's Professor Alan Hertzke. I think he's at Oklahoma. And there's a book out on it, and I can't remember the book. But if the U.S. cuts back on religious freedom in this arena, the extent to which we will be hypocrites in the world has just gone up by a hefty percentage. The International Religious Freedom Commission and the State Department's, concern with religious freedom as after the 1998 Act establishing the Religious Freedom Commission, et cetera. We are not going to be much of a beacon if we are now requiring religious institutions to pay for something that there is not only not demonstrated benefit, but is a substantial burden to them. So we better watch our statements on this. And it is proven that societies where religious freedom is robust also tend to have lots of equality for women, freedom of the press, and the more religious freedom is cabined, these other correlates don't do as well.
Yes. You spoke a little earlier about the timing and how we need to get our messaging on this done quicker and faster. I'm just curious to see how you see this issue of religious liberty playing out in the presidential race and how much this is tied to, or not tied to, the presidency of Barack Obama and how this is sort of like the war on women, how this is all playing out leading up to November. Are we racing the clock to get this done before the election, or do you see this spanning past that?
When I refer to a short time frame, I'm referring to the public's interest and the speed of the law. And I'm not referring to the political races. And I am, and I credit the church for this, not really partisan political, because I like to stick to the realm of the ideas on this. What I'm referring to is a window of time. And it's no doubt, right? When elections are coming around, you can pressure politicians to do things more than others. So to the extent that they feel they have to answer to constituents before an election, that factors in. So even if you're not thinking about winning or losing, you're thinking about in terms of a candidate, but winning or losing an issue, sure, bumping up against an election means something. You're going to need a political pollster to tell you whether this will play. Frankly, I think, when the Obama administration extended the deadline for this enforcement of the HHS mandate to August 2013, I thought maybe they were extending it in a way because they didn't want to see the Little Sisters of the Poor in handcuffs right around August. And I don't know if you saw the Little Sisters of the Poor here in D.C. put out a press release saying, we don't do this. We don't put out press releases on laws, but we're really upset and worried about our ministry to the aged. It was gorgeous. And it was so in their voice. I think the sight of the Little Sisters of the Poor in handcuffs was the only reason for deferring this the year. So it could have that effect. I think statements by the church to the extent, and that statement in the Bishop's Religious Liberty document a few weeks ago that said this is an unjust law, for anyone who's read any Catholic theology on this, that's the Liberty Bell going off before it cracked. I mean, that's huge. Unjust law is a ringing cry for a law that does not have to be obeyed. That's amazing. So I think to the extent they keep up statements about why this is an unjust law and how they do not intend to comply, it is a live political issue. How many people vote based on that? I haven't got the faintest idea. I do think that the war on women stuff has had somewhat of a backlash. It's so obviously politically ginned up. And it reminds me of nothing more than that sort of family values and the fight back and forth on what family values were, that was started, and then all the bumper stickers came, hate is not a family value, and Murphy Brown is a family value, and blah, blah. You know, it was an attempt, they threw it out there, and for people who are already devoted on one side or another of the substance of these issues, it might work. But I don't think it works on the average person. It's so cravenly political. That I just don't see it. Yes.
Going back to your discussion of same-sex marriage, how would you address the argument where describing same-sex marriage as like a stable benefit to society? You'll often say, oh, this couple, they've been together for 20 years, they're in a committed relationship, they're raising children together. You know, President Obama said, oh, my daughters have friends who have same-sex parents. So they would say, oh, look, we are the bedrock of society. How would you...
Wow, I hope his daughters have friends who have post-abortive regret somewhere in the family, because we're totally going to win then, right? We're going to, because that's all it takes, right? I mean, that's what presidential decisions are made of. Anyway, so the argument, the question when it comes to marriage, the question about respecting people with same-sex attraction, alone or with their partners, and their needs in rearing children. First thing to say is most people raising children in same-sex households have those children as a matter of prior heterosexual relationships. There's a very small percentage who actually have got adoption or new reproductive technologies. So the idea that those children who are in those already have a mother and a father somewhere, right? So the idea that we need to affirm this new relationship so the child has a marriage in their life, it's not very concrete, I think. The idea that somehow the state affirming them marriage will help those children. Couple things. One, some literature will be coming out in the coming year, and there's going to be some questioning regarding whether this is a parenting arrangement that we want to put the state stamp of approval on, whether we want to institutionalize it in the same way. So that's one question. The other is, if you're worried about benefiting children, which frankly more law is worried about benefiting children than it is about the couple, right? I mean, look at it. We have no-fault divorce. We have very little hurdles to jump through to get married in the first place. So the state isn't too worried about the couples, is it? It's not worried about heterosexual couples. It's not worried about same-sex couples. So there's no argument that the state has taken a strong interest in keeping couples together. It's not there. If we want to do things for children, do things for all children, fine. But redefining marriage so that it is no longer about the gluing together of men and women and the children they bring into the world isn't the way to help children. Those children, I mean, you'll notice that in the same-sex marriage litigation, whether it was Bear versus Mickey in Hawaii or the Baker case in Vermont, they always bring a couple with children, because that's the argument they make. I mean, most same-sex couples don't have children, but they always find one who has been together for a while who has children in order to make that case. But there's no evidence that you can't just do what we do in the rest of law, where we have out-of-wedlock births or divorce and everything, take care of the children. The idea that somehow we have to redefine marriage so that children are taken out of marriage and sex is vaulted as the highest value, sexual expression, how does that help kids overall? To say marriage isn't really about you. Oh, but in the case of same-sex marriage, it is. What? I don't get that. I think that argument is deconstructed pretty easily. There's no proof for it. There's just an assertion that if the state blesses my relationship, my kids will be better off.
Hi, sorry, I'm a little shell-shocked by your presentation, and I shouldn't be, but I am. I wanted to ask you, how is it that even though we seem to have the substance of truth on our side, when it comes to the rhetorical argument, we lose the rhetorical argument all the time.
On contraception or what?
I mean, on the whole spectrum of issues.
Of human sexuality issues?
Yeah, but I think what you've laid out, though, I think it shows that there's a far, far, far greater thing going on here than merely the issue of same-sex marriage, or merely the issue of contraception, or merely the issue of the extent of that government should be able to intervene in our lives. And I was really captured by that, what you told about the court decision about, well, wait a minute, a baby happened to follow upon marriage, or follow upon a sexual act, as though that were an undue religious imposition, when in reality it's a natural fruit of reality, it's a natural fruit of nature. So that, but yet there seems to be something illegitimate about that. So what you're really doing, if you're in that situation, is you're really at war with reality itself. You're at war with nature itself. And this is simply an unfolding of what Descartes wanted, which was that, look, I'm just my mind alone. My body is just a tool.
You notice in Deus Caritas Est, Benedict talks about, what was it, Descartes, and who was the one he talked to? One, they would greet themselves, "O soul, O flesh," remember? Or I forget what that, but yeah, it's the Descartes, is the goal.
Nature is something to be mastered, to be controlled, so that we do with it as we wish. So it strikes me then the reason that we're losing the rhetorical debate is because the paradigm is completely different. People are completely at ease with the idea that we don't try to live in agreement with nature. Nature is something for us to dominate, to lord over, to change, to modify, to control. So if we're losing the debate on same-sex marriage, at least rhetorically, it's because there's no sense of what is happening with nature.
Yeah.
So
I agree.
When we jump in at the last minute to say that there's a problem here, we have to be arguing the first principles just as much, if not more, arguing what's happening at the very end of the line.
Oh, yes. But I've been thinking about the same things. And when I try to drill down, here's some of the stuff I come up with. One, and there's a series of random thoughts that I'm trying desperately to put together in the next month, because it's due. One, of course, is original sin, right? So there's a factor floating through the human condition, this hereditary tendency to want to call things good or evil, to command all nature. John Paul II talked a lot about materialism and obsession with technology as fruits of this. I ask myself all the time, how come they're the ones overlooking the carcinogenic effects of the hormones of the pills? I mean, Bayer Pharmaceuticals just settled 11,000 women's claims against the birth control pill, Yaz. Like, how come the feminists aren't reporting on this? How come sorry. Can I just explain that my son put on this kind of 1970s lounge lizard music, and he locked it so that I can't undo it. And he did that because he wants me to answer the phone when he calls, and that was him. And I thought I had the volume down. He said, "I'm going to embarrass you with your phone, so you'll pick it up whenever I call." And the answer is not at this moment. Anyway, so there's that. There's also the fact, so there's original sin. I think there's also the fact that the feminists, and we have to give them some sympathy here, the body was used against women. Our difference, particularly our most radical difference, our fertility, was used against us. And then you have rape, and then you have prostitution and trafficking and domestic violence. And they said to themselves, must get rid of the body as a factor in thinking about women. How else can you explain why they refuse to look at anything physical? They don't want to know about the differences between men and women. They don't want to know about the harmful physical effects of birth control. They don't want to know about the whole, what goes on in the physical interaction between men and women when you divorce babies from sex. They just want to talk about being free from children as the ticket to opportunity. The last thing I think that's going on, when I'm trying to get at deeper things that are difficult to address in a brief way, but are precursors, is the fact that we rebel against the idea that we are not for ourselves. Right? Evangelium Vitae, I forget what paragraph it was, I think it was in the 50s when it talks about the meaning of life is. Oh my God, what did it say? It said the meaning of life is to live as Jesus lived, to give oneself life, to give oneself in service to the other. You know, what John Paul II quotes, and I guess it was in Gaudium et Spes, but it's everywhere in his writings, that you find oneself by losing oneself. I think that our hatred of this, and I can tell you as a product of 60s, 70s feminism, and I will say this out loud, and I'm still ashamed about it, but at that time, the idea that I would go through as much school as I went through, I was in school from 5 to 30 with a 6-month break, and then I would fork over that accomplishment to children, that I would give them the time of me who had built herself up human capital wise into that. I was totally sold on the idea that this was an abomination and a terrible thing to do to women. And because I felt that way, I can understand other people feeling that way. It took me a long time to get over that. And we all still struggle with it. But I really think that the resistance to the idea of self-abnegation, of service as the whole enchilada, lies behind a great deal of this. And for women, children represent that in a unique way. And I think that is one of the theological cores of the missteps in feminism that you're now seeing reflected in the law. So I think we have to call this to an end time-wise, right? So but you're getting at something that troubles me greatly, and I appreciate it. And we have to keep thinking about that. So, thank you very much.
Thank you. Let's all give a hand to Helen.